And so this relates to the lecture, Does God Exist? I'm going to do two major things. We may not have time for questions, I doubt if we will. But one of the things that I do frequently with Chinese students is when I ask them about the question of God, and they say, no, of course not. I was talking with one of my Chinese students by the name of Wei, and I said to him, I pulled out my cell phone, and I asked him, I said, Wei, how did this cell phone come to exist? And he says, somebody made it. And I pushed him a little bit. I pushed him a little bit intellectually. I said, how do you know? How do you know? Did you see them make it? Did you watch them with your eyes? Did you observe them? And he looks at me, because I have a lot of friendship with me, and he knew I was, doing it for intellectual reasons. I wasn't trying to, get him mad or ticked off. And he looks at me, he smiles, and he says, common sense, John. Common sense. Then I took out my digital camera, and I did the same thing. How did this come to exist, this digital camera? And he looks at me and said, somebody made it. And I pushed him a little bit on it. I said, how do you know? Did you watch them? Did you see them? Did you observe it? And he looks at me, he smiles, and he says, common sense, John. And I referred to the vehicle that we're sitting in, my van. And I said, how did this van come to exist? And he looks at me and he said, somebody made it. And I pushed him, I said, how do you know? Did you watch the assembly line? Did you go to the factory? Did you see them put it together? How do you know somebody made it? And he looks at me and he says, common sense, John. And then I delivered the punchline to him. I said, wait, where did the universe come from? How did the universe come to exist? And he looks at me and says, I don't know. And I looked at him and I smiled. I said, common sense. Common sense. Do you have to watch the assembly line to know that a cell phone was produced by someone, a person? Do you need to know that? Do you need to observe that data to know whether or not somebody made this? Of course not. It's intuitively obvious to you. And if I suggest that this was the random result of a tornado blowing through Radio Shack electronics store, you'd look at me and think I was doing some serious drug activity. You doing those hallucinogenic mushrooms again, John? What are you doing? Dude, I mean, get a brain. Somebody made it. Somebody made it. I was speaking at USC to the Atheist Club there a number of years ago. And I had done a little apologetic seminar, and the president of the Atheist Club was in my apologetic seminar for about 45 minutes. And he said to my friend, who's a committed Christian, he said, you tell John he's got a standing invitation to come to the Atheist Club and speak anytime he wants to our club. And that was because Kalam was so impressed with what I had to say. So a month later, I went to the Atheist Club. But before the meeting, before I spoke, and I did exactly what I'm doing this afternoon. We're having dinner together, and Colin kept on making comments as we're talking about world affairs. And he'd say, well, that shouldn't be that way. And I called him on it, and I said, no, excuse me, Colin, I'm not trying to be unkind to you, but that word is not allowed in your vocabulary. The word should or ought or good or bad is not allowed in a worldview dominated by atheism. If you're an atheist, no, I'm not trying to step on your toes or hurt you. I like you. But you're not entitled to words such as should or ought or good or bad. Why? There is no good. Good doesn't exist. Bad doesn't exist. There are no moral oughts. It doesn't exist. Without God in the picture, there is no morality. It doesn't exist. But Colin, every 15 to 20 seconds, would make moral statements. And I'd smile, I'd call him on and say, Colin, you're not entitled to say that. You're an atheist. There is no good or bad. There is no should or ought. And he'd smile and say, you're right. You're right. I'd say, but Colin, it's interesting that you cannot not stop talking using moral language. That's the moral argument. C.S. Lewis says, people cannot not use moral language. And that's evidence that God exists. Is there anything objectively evil? Is it really wrong to hate somebody based upon their skin color? Is that really wrong? Is it really wrong to put somebody in prison that's never committed the crime, that's innocent, and you put him in jail or her in jail for a crime they've never committed? Is that really wrong? Well, if you think it is, that means good exists. And if good exists, there's got to be an ultimate good, and that ultimate good is God. The sheet that you have, the Kalam cosmological argument, I was doing a survey on a secular campus, Valley College in San Bernardino, that's where I live. And I was doing a survey with a student that was a junior, and he was a physics major. And when we got to the God question, I asked him, I said, James, I said, do you believe in God? He said, no, I do not. I don't think God exists. And I said, well, you really should believe in God. He's like, why? I said, because God is real, and I can prove it. And he said, you can prove it? Absolutely. It's like, so you're going to quote the Bible to me? I said, no, I'm not going to use the Bible. He's like, you're going to prove God to me, and you're not going to use the Bible. I said, that's correct. He's like, how are you going to prove it? I said, science and philosophy. He's like, whoa. Give it to me. John, give it to me. I said, no problem. I flipped the page over and I drew out this diagram. I said, James, the universe exists. Would you agree? He said, absolutely. I said, well, if the universe exists, it either had no beginning or it had a beginning. Stephen F. Hawking, the British astrophysicist, says virtually everyone agrees that the universe had a beginning at some point in the past, and that time, space, matter, and energy started with the Big Bang explosion. Virtually everybody in the sciences knows that the universe had a beginning. And James was no exception. He said, John, it had a beginning. I said, I think you're right. I think it did have a beginning. If it had a beginning, it had one of two options. It was not caused by anything, or it was caused. Well, if something has a beginning, it has to have a cause. And so James said, well, it's obvious it had a cause. In fact, one student, when I shared this with him, looked at me and says, my mind cannot think in a category where something has a beginning but it has no cause. It can't give existence to itself because it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, there's nothing that it can cause because there's nothing there to have causative relationships. So it is definitely caused, and there's two options for causation. Event-event causation or agent causation. So, this illustration won't work that well because there's no windows in here, but if there were, if we're sitting in the school cafeteria, or we're sitting in the classroom, and the wind was blowing really, really hard, and it broke off a branch from a tree, and that wind was so strong that it carried the branch, and that branch hit a window, and when the branch hit the window shattered and broke. That would be an event-event causation. One event, branch hitting window. Second event, window breaking. That would be an event-event causation. So do you know what happened when Hurricane Katrina, about 6-7 years ago in New Orleans, when Hurricane Katrina hit the Home Depot lumberyard in New Orleans, do you know what happened? It built an entire condominium complex. The hurricane framed all the houses, put in all the doors and the window and laid the carpet, put on all the shingles on the roof. You can even choose your paint color for the rooms if you want. Just tell Hurricane Katrina what you want it to build. Is that what happened? No. Some guy, when I was speaking on a secular campus, he wasn't mad at me. He was just, because I told it like I believed it, but I don't believe it. I think it's stupidity. It's craziness. And so when I was giving that illustration, he just kind of burst out because he couldn't contain himself. He says, that's absurd! I said, my point exactly. Thank you for making my point for me. Hurricane Katrina hitting the Home Depot lumberyard, and it's going to build an entire condominium complex, is absolutely crazy insane. Foolishness. So, would a random directionless force produce an ordered universe? Absolutely not. Random directionless forces don't produce anything but chaos. But this universe is absolutely fine-tuned, highly fine-tuned. It is extremely designed within small parameters. For example, Stephen F. Hawking said, if the expansion rate of the universe were off by 100 billionth of a billion %, Lots of zeros and then a 1. The universe would have recollapsed into a hot fireball. If proton attraction in the nucleus of atoms were a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger, we would not have atomic formation or molecule formation. There's 50 parameters talked about in the science textbooks called the anthropic principles. Very, very finely designed things that make life possible anywhere in the universe. If the mass density of the universe were off by a single American dime, more or less, we would not have planet formation. And these design principles or parameters are just mind-boggling precise. So a random directionless force like a hurricane will never produce a condominium complex, nor will a random directionless force produce an incredibly ordered, finely tuned design universe. It never will do it. But you have another problem. That problem is there are no events prior to the Big Bang event. The Big Bang is the first event. Now, sometimes when I talk about the existence of the universe, people, when I ask them what caused it, they'll say, the Big Bang. Irrational response. You park your car. Now, maybe most of you don't have, a car. You didn't drive to school, but some of you did. How many of you drove a car to school today? Only a few. Okay. You drive your car to school. You park in the parking lot. A couple hours later, you forgot one of your books, so you go back out to your car to get a book, and everything's okay with your car. Then a couple hours later, when you have a lunch break, you go back out to your car to get some more books, and lo and behold, the fire department is there, and the car is on fire. And so you ask the fire chief, as they're putting out the fire in your car, you say, Chief, what caused the fire? And he looks at you with a straight face and says, the fire. And you're like, no, dude, when I parked the stinking car, there was no fire. So don't tell me the fire caused the fire. The fire is the effect. The fire is the result. Well, that's analogous to the Big Bang. The Big Bang isn't the cause of the universe. The Big Bang is the result of the universe. The Big Bang is the fire. So when I say, what caused the universe? People say, well, the Big Bang. I'm like, no, dude. The car's on fire. What caused the fire? The fire. I'm like, no, dude, it wasn't the fire. The fire didn't exist. Couldn't be the fire. The fire's the result. So what caused the Big Bang? Can't be an event. Why? There are no events prior to the Big Bang. When the Big Bang happened, prior to that, there's no time. There's no space. There's no material substance. There's no energy. So, may I touch you gently on the shoulder area? So, I'm gonna push Harry's shoulder with my hand. But in order to do that, I have to transverse distance. And the transverse distance takes time. And my hand is composed of material substance. And when I push him on the shoulder, that involves force or energy. Time, space, matter, energy, in order to have an event, me pushing him against his arm. There is no time, so there are no events. There is no material substance. There is no space. There is no energy. There's nothing in those four categories to cause anything, because those four things don't have existence yet. So, if the answer for a true and false question is either true or false, which seems obvious that if it's a true or false question, and the answer is not true, then the answer is, if the answer is either A or B, and it's not A, the answer is, if you have a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have a whole number, whole numbers are either even or odd. If I'm thinking of a number and it's not even, then it has to be odd. Those are exhaustive categories. So if it's either an event-event causation or agent causation, and it is not event causation, gee whiz, I wonder what the answer is. It's got to be agent causation. It's not a what, it's a who. What do you call somebody who builds buildings? A builder, right? A builder. What do you call someone who creates universe? Creator. That's what he did. It's describing the event. So a personal agent, a person, a who, actually made this universe. What can we tell about this personal agent? Has to be awfully smart. Has to be incredibly powerful. Has to be capable of choice. This building hasn't always been here. Somebody had to make a choice that this building was going to be built. So this personal agent, this creator, is capable of choice. In other words, he's a person. He's not a human being, but he's a person capable of choice, capable of relationship. This personal agent is timeless, which means eternal. This personal agent is not composed of material substance, not a physical being. This personal agent doesn't occupy space, could be omnipresent, since he or she does not occupy space. This personal agent is not energy, something other than that. This personal agent is in fact a person, and this personal agent existed before the universe existed. This personal agent exists separate from the universe. This argument gets us to what's known as theism. There's a personal God that exists, that is distinct from the universe, and actually created the universe. This does not prove Christianity, but this does prove theism. There is a God that exercised choice and caused this universe to come into existence. And as we observe this planet, planet Earth, we get some insights to the nature of this God. Do you love your mother, men and women? Do you love your mother? Now, I never ask, do you love your father? Because that's not going to work. Because I'll get a big split on that. Some people say, no, I don't love my father. But if I say, do you love your mother? I get almost 100% hit on that. So that's a safer question. We love because God made us for the capacity of love. We didn't get it from DNA. We didn't get it from culture. We didn't get it from oxygen. We didn't get it from drinking water. So as we observe ourselves and as we observe planet Earth, we can get some insight to this personal creator that made us. So the Kalam cosmological argument gets us to theism. Tomorrow, when I'm back again, I'll deal with some questions, and I'll try to move from theism to Christianity and talk briefly why I think Christianity is the religion that got the answer to the question right. There's only three theistic religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. I don't have a bone to pick with Judaism because Christianity is referred to as Judeo-Christianity. I think Christianity is the fulfillment of the Old Testament scriptures, which is Judaism. My bone would be to pick with Islam. Now, if I wanted to pick a bone with atheism, I would, or with Hinduism. This diagram, if this is correct, if my argumentation is logical, this just got rid of two world religions. Now, if you're in those world religions, I humbly apologize for telling you the truth. Forgive me for telling you the truth. But two religions just went down the toilet. I was at the University of Nebraska at Kearney, a girl from Nepal, the country of Nepal, which is where Mount Everest is. She said, "John, you've dismissed my religion of Hinduism." I said, "Yes, I have. Because Hinduism says the universe and God are the same thing. That the universe never had a beginning. And that God is just the sum total of material substance. That is clearly false." Have you ever done a math exam where it's got 14 questions and you need to get the right answer to question number 1 in order to have a possibility of getting the answer right to number 2 and 3 and 4 and so on? So if you get the first answer wrong, you're in serious dog doo-doo for the rest of the test. Hinduism and Buddhism got the answer to the first question wrong. They're in serious dog doo-doo. Stay tuned for tomorrow for session number 2.